The rain drummed against the windows of Bella Vista, one of Los Angeles' most exclusive restaurants, where a single meal could cost more than most people's monthly rent. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in pristine white linen, while the soft murmur of conversation mixed with the gentle clinking of expensive silverware against fine china. It was the kind of place where Hollywood elite came to see and be seen, where million-dollar deals were sealed over champagne that cost more per bottle than a car payment. In the corner booth, wearing a simple black t-shirt and well-worn jeans, sat a man who looked like he'd wandered in from the street. His dark hair was slightly tousled, his beard neatly trimmed but casual, and his entire demeanor radiated the kind of quiet contentment that comes from someone completely comfortable in their own skin. While other patrons checked their phones constantly or craned their necks to see who else was dining, he sat peacefully, occasionally glancing around with genuine curiosity rather than the calculated awareness of someone working a room. What happened next would leave everyone completely speechless. At a table nearby, Marcus Goldstein adjusted his Rolex Submariner for the third time in 5 minutes, the $15,000 timepiece catching the light as he gestured dismissively toward the casually dressed man. Marcus was everything Hollywood stereotypes suggested about successful entertainment lawyers. Perfectly styled hair, a suit that cost more than most people's cars, and an aura of self-importance that preceded him into every room like an expensive cologne. "Look at that guy," Marcus muttered to his dining companion, a studio executive named Bradley who was equally impressed with his own reflection in his phone screen. "Probably can't even afford to be here. I mean, seriously, who comes to Bella Vista dressed like they're going to Home Depot?" The man in question, Keanu Reeves, though he'd never announce it, continued reading his book, occasionally taking a sip of water while completely unaware of the judgment being passed his way. There was something almost meditative about his presence, as if he existed in his own peaceful bubble despite the pretentious atmosphere swirling around him. Bradley glanced over and smirked. Maybe he's lost, or maybe he's hoping to get discovered. You know how these wannabe actors are. They'll eat ramen for a month just to afford one meal at a place like this, hoping some producer will notice them. What neither man realized was that they were about to witness something that would fundamentally change their understanding of what it means to be noticed, and more importantly, what it means to notice others. The evening had started like any other at Bella Vista. The usual crowd of industry professionals had filled their usual tables, discussing their usual deals over their usual expensive wine. The restaurant's atmosphere was thick with the kind of manufactured sophistication that comes from spending too much money on too little substance, where conversations revolved around box office numbers, option deals, and who was sleeping with whom in the latest Hollywood scandal. Marcus had been holding court at his table, regaling his companions with stories of his latest legal victories. How he'd negotiated a 7-figure deal for a client who couldn't act their way out of a paper bag. How he'd strong-armed a studio into backing down from a lawsuit that would have cost them millions. He spoke with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged, never been humbled, never been forced to question whether his definition of success had any real meaning. "The thing about this business," Marcus was saying, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "is that it's all about image. People don't want authenticity. They want the appearance of authenticity. They want to believe in the fantasy, but they don't actually want to live it. That's why guys like me make the real money, while the dreamers stay dreamers." It was then that the music started. From somewhere near the restaurant's small performance area, a voice began to rise. Not the polished, auto-tuned sound of a professional recording, but something raw and honest and achingly beautiful. The voice belonged to a young woman, maybe 22 or 23, with long dark hair that fell in gentle waves around her shoulders and eyes that held both hope and desperation in equal measure. She stood beside a simple microphone stand, holding an acoustic guitar that had seen better years, its worn surface telling stories of countless late-night practice sessions and small venue performances. Her name was Sofia Martinez, though most of the restaurant's patrons wouldn't bother to learn it. To them, she was just background entertainment, sonic wallpaper to accompany their overpriced meals and self-important conversations. But her voice was something else entirely. She sang an original song, something she'd written during the long nights spent in hospital waiting rooms, watching her grandfather fight a battle that medical bills were making impossible to win. The lyrics spoke of love that transcends time, of sacrifice and hope, of the way music can be both a refuge and a cry for help. Her voice cracked slightly on the high notes, not from lack of skill but from the weight of emotion she carried, and somehow that imperfection made the performance more beautiful, more real than anything that had graced these walls in years. Most of the diners continued their conversations, treating her music like an intrusion rather than a gift. Conversations about stock options and weekend houses in Malibu carried on uninterrupted, punctuated by the occasional laugh at some insider joke that reinforced their sense of belonging to an exclusive club. But not everyone was ignoring her. In his corner booth, Keanu had quietly closed his book and was listening with his full attention. There was something about her voice that reminded him of why he'd fallen in love with storytelling in the first place. Not for the fame or the money or the industry recognition, but for those rare moments when art touches something true and fundamental in the human experience. He could hear the story behind her song, could feel the desperation and love that had shaped every word, every note. Marcus, however, was less impressed. He glanced toward the performance area with the kind of dismissive look usually reserved for street musicians or subway performers. "Great," he said, loud enough for his voice to carry. "Now we've got to listen to some wannabe singer-songwriter while we're trying to eat. This place is really going downhill." His companion Bradley chuckled, raising his wineglass in a mock toast. "To the death of fine dining," he said. "Pretty soon they'll be letting anyone in here." The cruel irony of their words wasn't lost on the universe, though it would take a few more minutes for that irony to fully manifest. Sophia's first song ended to polite but scattered applause. She thanked the audience with genuine gratitude, her voice soft but carrying clearly through the restaurant's acoustics. "Thank you so much," she said. I want to share something with you all, if that's okay." She paused, taking a breath that seemed to draw strength from somewhere deep inside. "I'm here tonight because my grandfather needs surgery. He raised me after my parents died, and he's been everything to me, my family, my teacher, my biggest supporter. The doctors say he doesn't have much time left without the operation and insurance." She paused again, her voice threatening to break. "Insurance won't cover it, so I'm here, sharing my music with you, hoping that maybe somehow we can raise enough to give him a fighting chance." The restaurant fell into an uncomfortable silence. These were people accustomed to charity galas where they could write tax-deductible checks and feel good about themselves without really having to confront the raw reality of human need. This was different. This was immediate and personal and happening right in front of them. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but not from sympathy. He was annoyed that his expensive dinner was being interrupted by what he saw as emotional manipulation. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to Bradley. "We didn't come here to be guilt-tripped by some sob story. If she needs money, she should get a real job instead of trying to make diners feel responsible for her problems." His words carried further than he intended, and several people at nearby tables turned to look at him with expressions ranging from embarrassment to outright disgust. But Marcus was too caught up in his own indignation to notice or care. Sophia began her second song, this one even more personal than the first. It was a lullaby her grandfather had sung to her as a child, adapted with her own lyrics about the lessons he'd taught her, about kindness, perseverance, and the importance of helping others even when you have little to give. Her voice grew stronger as she sang, as if the music itself was feeding her courage. At his table, Keanu found himself moved not just by the performance, but by the young woman's resilience. He'd seen enough of life to recognize genuine struggle when he encountered it, and he could tell that every word she sang came from a place of authentic experience. He thought about his own grandfather, about the people who had shaped him into the person he was, about the responsibility that comes with having the power to help others. Without making a show of it, He quietly signaled their server and asked for the check. He also asked if there was a way to contribute to Sophia's cause, speaking so softly that his words were meant only for the server's ears. Marcus, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly agitated. The combination of wine and his natural tendency towards self-righteousness was creating a volatile mixture. "This is exactly what's wrong with this city," he announced to his table, though his voice was loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Everyone's got a sob story, and everyone thinks the world owes them something. You want money? Work for it like the rest of us." A woman at a nearby table, a school teacher who was celebrating her anniversary with her husband at the only upscale restaurant they could afford once a year, turned around to face Marcus. "Maybe you could show a little compassion," she said quietly. "She's not asking for handouts. She's performing, sharing her talent." Marcus's face reddened. "Compassion? Lady, I work 12-hour days so I can afford to eat at places like this without having to listen to someone else's problems. If I wanted charity cases, I'd go to a soup kitchen." The tension in the restaurant was becoming palpable. Other diners were beginning to stare, some pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a scene. Sophia, still performing, was trying to maintain her composure despite the obvious disruption, but her voice was beginning to waver with the stress of the situation. It was then that Keanu stood up. He didn't make a dramatic show of it. He simply rose from his seat with the same quiet grace that characterized everything he did, walked the few steps to Marcus's table, and stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, looking down at the agitated lawyer with an expression of calm curiosity. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying that distinctive tone that millions of moviegoers would recognize instantly, though Marcus was too wound up to place it immediately. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation, and I was wondering if you might help me understand something." Marcus looked up, irritated at being interrupted. "What?" "Well," Keanu continued, pulling out a chair and sitting down uninvited, "I'm trying to figure out what makes someone so angry about witnessing another person's courage." The simple question landed like a depth charge in the middle of Marcus's bluster. "Courage? She's panhandling in a restaurant. Is she?" Keanu asked, genuinely curious. "Because from where I was sitting, it looked like someone sharing their gift with a room full of strangers, hoping that her talent might be enough to save someone she loves. That seems pretty brave to me." Bradley leaned forward, finally recognizing something familiar about the stranger who'd joined their table. "Wait a minute," he said slowly. "Aren't you—" But Keanu continued as if he hadn't heard the question, his attention focused entirely on Marcus. "I'm curious about something else, too. You mentioned working 12-hour days. What kind of work do you do?" Marcus straightened, his earlier confidence returning as he moved into familiar territory. "I'm an entertainment lawyer. I represent A-list talent, negotiate contracts worth millions. I work with people who've actually made something of themselves." "That's impressive," Keanu said, and his tone suggested he meant it. "So you're successful. You've built something. You can afford nice dinners, expensive clothes." He gestured toward Marcus's obviously costly outfit. "You've achieved what most people would consider the American dream." "Damn right I have." "So help me understand this," Keanu said, leaning forward slightly. "If you've been blessed with that kind of success, that kind of abundance, what is it about someone else's struggle that threatens you so much?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus started to respond, then stopped, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for words that wouldn't come. "I mean," Keanu continued, his voice still gentle but somehow more penetrating, "if you're truly secure in what you've built, why does someone else's need for help make you angry instead of grateful for your own good fortune?" By now, Sophia had finished her song, and the entire restaurant had gone quiet. Everyone was watching the exchange at Marcus's table, though many still didn't realize they were witnessing one of the world's most famous actors delivering an impromptu masterclass in human decency. Marcus's face was cycling through various shades of red. "I'm not threatened by anything. I just don't think people should have to listen to sob stories when they're trying to enjoy an expensive meal." "An expensive meal," Keanu repeated thoughtfully. "Right. So the money you're spending tonight, what does that represent to you? What do you mean?" Well, you worked for it, right? 12-hour days, you said. So that money represents your time, your effort, your expertise. It's a symbol of your value as a person, the contribution you make to the world. Marcus nodded, feeling like he was on steadier ground. Exactly. And how much would you say you're spending tonight? Just roughly. Marcus glanced at Bradley, who shrugged. I don't know, maybe 400 or 500 for both of us? $500, Keanu mused, for one meal, and that felt like a reasonable use of your hard-earned money? It's a special occasion. We're celebrating a big deal I just closed. I see, so you're investing in an experience, in marking an achievement. That makes sense. Keanu paused, seeming to consider something. Can I ask what the young woman over there is asking for? For her grandfather's surgery? Marcus looked uncomfortable. I don't know, I wasn't really listening to the details. The server mentioned it's about $15,000, Keanu said quietly. Her grandfather needs heart surgery and insurance won't cover the procedure because it's considered experimental, even though it's his only chance. The number hung in the air between them. $15,000. A sum that represented life or death to Sophia, but was roughly equivalent to what Marcus probably spent on clothes in a few months. So let me see if I understand this correctly. Keanu continued. You can spend $500 on a single meal to celebrate your success, but the idea of contributing even a small portion of that to help save someone's life makes you angry enough to disrupt the entire restaurant? Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but Keanu wasn't finished. I'm not judging you, he said, and his tone made it clear that he meant it. I'm genuinely trying to understand the logic, because it seems to me that if you've been blessed with enough abundance to spend money casually on experiences, you might also have been blessed with enough to share some of that abundance with someone who's facing a crisis they can't handle alone. The restaurant remained silent, everyone straining to hear every word of the conversation. Sophia stood near her microphone, guitar still in hand, watching with wide eyes as this stranger defended her with more eloquence and grace than she'd ever heard in her life. Bradley finally found his voice. I know who you are, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You're Keanu Reeves. The recognition rippled through the restaurant like a wave. Phones came out, heads turned, and suddenly everyone was trying to get a better look at the man who'd been sitting quietly in the corner all evening. But Keanu seemed oblivious to the attention. His focus remained entirely on Marcus, who was now looking like a man who'd just realized he'd been arguing with gravity. Mr. Reeves, Marcus stammered, his entire demeanor changing in an instant. I had no idea. I mean, I'm a huge fan of your work. The Matrix movies, John Wick, incredible performances. Keanu smiled slightly, but it was a sad sort of smile. And now that you know who I am, your opinion about what we've been discussing has changed. Marcus looked confused. What do you mean? Well, a few minutes ago, you were convinced that helping someone in need was wrong, that people should just work harder instead of asking for help. But now that you know I'm someone famous, are you going to agree with me just because of who I am? The question cut to the heart of everything Marcus had built his identity around: success, status, the importance of being associated with the right people. That's not. Because here's the thing, Keanu said, his voice growing slightly firmer. Everything I said to you would be just as true if I were a janitor or a taxi driver or unemployed. The value of an idea doesn't change based on who's saying it, and a person's worth isn't determined by their bank account or their job title or whether other people recognize their name. He gestured towards Sophia, who was still standing by the microphone. That young woman over there has more courage in her little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. She's facing something that would break a lot of people, watching someone she loves die because she can't afford to save them. And instead of giving up, she's standing in front of a room full of strangers, sharing her heart through her music, hoping against hope that her talent might be enough. Keanu stood up, but he didn't walk away from the table. Instead, he continued speaking, and now his voice carried clearly throughout the restaurant. You want to know what I think makes someone successful? It's not the money they make or the recognition they receive. It's whether they use whatever they've been given: talent, resources, opportunities, to make the world a little bit better. It's whether they see other people's struggles as opportunities for compassion rather than inconveniences to their comfort. He looked around the restaurant, making eye contact with as many people as possible. Every single person in this room has been blessed with something. Maybe it's money, maybe it's talent, maybe it's just the luxury of being able to afford a meal at a place like this. And with those blessings comes a choice. Do we use what we have to build walls between ourselves and other people's pain, or do we use it to build bridges? Sophia was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she listened to this stranger articulate everything she'd felt but never been able to express. She'd spent so many nights wondering if there was still kindness in the world, if people still cared about each other beyond their own immediate needs and desires. Keanu walked over to her, and his voice became gentle again. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophia," she managed to say through her tears. "Sophia Martinez." "Sophia, that was beautiful. Your grandfather would be proud." You really think so?" "I know so. Music like that doesn't come from technique or training. It comes from love. And love like that doesn't go unnoticed, not by the people who really matter." He turned back toward the restaurant, where everyone was watching in absolute silence. "Sophia needs $15,000 to save her grandfather's life. I'm going to make sure she gets it, but I want to ask all of you to think about something." He paused, letting his words sink in. "When you leave here tonight, you're going to go back to your lives, your comfortable homes, your successful careers, your carefully curated social media feeds where you present the best versions of yourselves to the world. And that's fine. We all do that. But I want you to remember this moment. Remember Sophia's courage. Remember the choice you have every single day between building walls and building bridges." Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, quickly navigating to his banking app. "Sophia, do you have Venmo or PayPal or some way for people to contribute?" Sophia nodded, her hands shaking as she pulled out her own phone and showed him her payment apps. Within minutes, Keanu had transferred $15,000 to Sophia's account, but he wasn't done. "I'm covering the surgery," he announced to the restaurant. "But Sophia is still performing, and she's still sharing her gift with all of you. If her music has moved you, if her story has touched you, if you want to help her build something beyond just surviving this crisis, she deserves your support." What happened next was extraordinary. Person after person began approaching Sophia, not just to contribute money, but to talk with her, to hear more of her story, to connect with her as a human being rather than just background entertainment. A record producer gave her his business card. A music teacher offered free lessons. A songwriter wanted to collaborate. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus slowly stood up from his table and walked over to where Sophia was accepting congratulations and well wishes from the other diners. "Sophia," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the conversations around them, "I owe you an apology, a big one." She looked at him with curious eyes, recognizing him as the man who'd been so critical earlier, but not holding any anger in her expression. "I said some really terrible things tonight," Marcus continued. "Things that came from a place of, honestly, I don't even know where they came from. Fear, maybe. Selfishness. The idea that caring about other people somehow makes you weak." He paused, struggling with words that didn't come naturally to him. "But watching you up there, listening to your music, seeing your courage, I realized something. You're stronger than I am. You're doing something I've never had the guts to do." "What's that?" Sophia asked gently. "You're being real. You're letting people see who you really are, even when it makes you vulnerable, even when people like me might judge you for it." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. "I'm an entertainment lawyer. I have connections in the music industry. If you ever want to explore opportunities beyond just getting by, call me. I'd like to help, if you'll let me." Sophia accepted the card with a smile that could have powered the restaurant's lights. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you know." As the evening wound down, Keanu prepared to leave as quietly as he'd arrived, but Sophia caught up with him near the entrance. "Mr. Reeves," she said, and he turned to face her. "I don't know how to thank you. You didn't just save my grandfather's life. You reminded me that there are still good people in the world." Keanu smiled, and for the first time all evening, it was a completely unguarded expression. Sophia, you were the one who reminded everyone else. I just helped amplify what you were already sharing. Your grandfather is lucky to have someone who loves him the way you do. Will you meet him when he's better? I'd be honored to, Keanu said, and I'd love to hear more of your music when you're ready to share it with the world. As he walked out into the Los Angeles night, past the paparazzi who had somehow already gotten word that he was at the restaurant, Keanu thought about the evening's events. He thought about Marcus, who had started the night so certain of his own righteousness and ended it questioning everything he thought he knew about success and human worth. He thought about Sophia, whose courage had transformed a room full of strangers into a community, even if only for one evening. But mostly, he thought about the choice that everyone faces every single day, the choice between cynicism and compassion, between protecting what we have and sharing it with others, between building walls and building bridges. Inside the restaurant, Marcus sat alone at his table long after Bradley had left, staring at the empty performance area where Sophia had stood. The server approached with the check, but Marcus was lost in thought. He was thinking about his 12-hour days, about the deals he negotiated and the clients he represented. He was thinking about what it meant to be successful, about what he'd been chasing all these years, and whether he'd been running towards something meaningful or just running away from the fear of not being important enough. For the first time in years, Marcus found himself wondering if there might be a different way to measure a life well lived. The next morning, Sofia Martinez woke up to discover that her Venmo account had received not just the $15,000 from Keanu Reeves, but an additional $8,000 from other diners who had been moved by her performance and his words. More importantly, her phone was full of messages from people who wanted to help, to collaborate, to connect. Her grandfather's surgery was scheduled for the following week, and for the first time in months, Sophia allowed herself to believe that everything was going to be okay. But the real miracle of that evening at Bella Vista wasn't the money that was raised, or even the life that was saved. It was the reminder that in a world that often seems divided by differences in wealth, status, and background, there are still moments when our shared humanity shines through. When someone's courage inspires others to be better, when a stranger's compassion reminds us of our own capacity for kindness, when a simple act of listening, really listening to another person's story, can transform both the storyteller and the audience. Marcus Goldstein would go on to become one of Sofia Martinez's biggest supporters, using his industry connections to help launch her music career. But more than that, he became a different kind of person, someone who understood that true success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you contribute. And Keanu Reeves? He continued being exactly who he'd always been, someone who understood that fame and fortune are just tools, and the real question isn't whether you have them, but what you choose to do with them when you do. The story of that evening spread far beyond the walls of Bella Vista, becoming one of those rare social media moments that actually brought out the best in people rather than the worst. But for those who were there, who witnessed it firsthand, it became something more than just a story to share. It became a reminder that every day, in small ways and large ones, we all have the opportunity to be the person who builds bridges instead of walls, who chooses compassion over cynicism, who recognizes that the courage to be vulnerable in a world that often rewards facades is perhaps the greatest strength of all. In the end, Sophia's grandfather made a full recovery from his surgery. She continued performing, eventually landing a recording contract and building a career based not just on her musical talent, but on her ability to connect with people through authentic storytelling. She never forgot the lesson of that night, that sometimes the very thing that makes us feel most vulnerable can also be the thing that saves us. And somewhere in Los Angeles, in restaurants and coffee shops and venues both large and small, the ripple effects of that one evening continue to spread, reminding people that kindness is contagious, that compassion is a choice, and that sometimes all it takes to change the world is one person brave enough to share their story and another person wise enough to really listen.